Oh my god, that's so much happened today. This is going to be a bit of a long one as well. So this is the day the expo floor opened. And long story short, I caught up with some old friends and did a lot more socializing than I expected, though, which I think is a good thing ultimately. And I managed to keep my talk amount a good clip, I think. I was planning on skipping more, but I'm glad, frankly, I did not. I skipped, I think, most of the ones that I felt like were good skipping. But without further ado, let's get back on track. Shaders, and then socializing stuff. Sorry for my sore throat. My throat's been sore for the past couple days. I got some cough drops this morning. They've been very good. I've been taking them conservatively throughout the day, which I think has been helping. Anyway, first talk was about mesh shaders. So the gist of what this means is, in a normal pipeline, we have input assembly, then a geometry stage in tessellation, and then tessellation geometry, vertex tessellation geometry, rasterization. We have to step in assembling the input and forming or winding for the triangles and such. AMD worked on adding a new system, making a new system where you combine your tessellation geometry stages into kind of one step, and you make it so that you don't represent your vertices as a buffer with indices, but as one set of indices that you represent differently. So basically it allows them to shrink the amount of storage needed to express a mesh. So it compresses the mesh fast. And more importantly, because you're representing the mesh triangles in the winding order, essentially you're doing it a lot of this is encoded in one go. You actually can do procedural geometry a lot faster than something like a triangle, like a tessellation shader, and more with less space. So it's faster than geometry and faster than tessellation. So it does some of the things you might want to do with either one, but better. But the main thing is you can even do cool things like triangles per triangle LOD or per triangle culling. You can reuse, you reuse more of your vertices more effectively. You don't have any duplicates. You still have duplicates, but you don't have as many in the encoding. If you still need to be, careful, because you can make things worse if you don't quite understand how everything works. It's not magic. But it's very cool tech, frankly. I'm glad I saw it. I could see this becoming more popular. Tessellation shaders aren't very popular these days, and it's not useless, but they're not that useful. Like, they're situational. They're mostly in cases where you need to do something with a height map of some kind, like snow. Like, that's what I saw in God of War. Like, the God of War talk used tessellation, which makes sense. That's a perfectly reasonable use case, but I need to look into why, but tessellation isn't used that often, to my knowledge. I need to learn more about the details of like specifics, but I know that. And geometry shaders are terrible. Like there's, performance-wise, they're terrible, and mainly due to the overhead that they incur to even make them work to begin with, and the amount of data they need to bring involved in. And often, also, you don't need them. You can do a lot of things in other shader stages just as well. Like if you want to make a wireframe, you could just like check well, I'm thinking of a weird example, but if you're like doing a wireframe curvature, you could just check to see if your constructed normals are angled in any way, and you know that anytime a triangle immediately has a big tilt, you know that's where the edge is. It obviously wouldn't work in the case of like flat, but you know what I mean. There's a lot of things you can do that you don't need a geometry stage to do, even though convenient. So this is good. It does a lot of cool stuff, and it's very powerful. I went to an AMD processor optimization talk. This is basically, you would think this would be more about like general optimization tips, which it has some, but it's part ad for, you know, hey, we have new cool hardware that's really fast and cool. And then they are giving recommendations on how to use that more effectively. And I don't have enough working experience to contextualize this in a way that doesn't make it feel abstract and hard to follow. So unfortunately, I don't find this talk particularly interesting. And I think it's just not the best talk. I think a sign of a bad talk is when you start reading off the slides, to me at least. If you start reading off the slides and you treat the slide as your talk, but not a guide, like a summary of points with your explanation being detailed, that's a bad sign. So it wasn't a great talk, frankly. There's not nothing in here. It's just, it would be hard for me to summarize, and I don't quite have it all in my head. But this highlight that there's a lot of weird stuff that gets involved, like little things that get involved in optimizations. And there's some interesting things I learned, like the concept of a spin lock, where you're trying to sync up the GPU and the CPU, and you can cause crashes based off of syncing it poorly. The most interesting talk, I think one of the most interesting talks today was Cyberpunk's path tracing. Cyberpunk's path tracing, let me explain what path tracing is. So you might hear it interchangeably be described with ray tracing, and that makes sense because it's an extension of ray tracing. Like ray tracing is simply just, hey, bounce here, then bounce back to a light source for direct illumination. Path tracing is stranger. Instead of going directly back to the light source, you just randomly bounce around the ray, and then you hope that the rays bounce back to a light source. And it's horrible from a performance perspective because most of the rays are going to miss. So for years, it has been the domain of movies or animation like Pixar, because path tracing otherwise is impossible for real time, or it seemed impossible. So what they did was they used this paper, they based it off a paper called RESTOR. It's an acronym, I don't remember the quite name. I think it's illuminated reservoir, I know is the last part, because it's based off of this idea of gathering probabilistic web reservoirs. basically the whole gist of it is that instead of, since you basically guess which rays are actually going to matter, and you weight them, and you build these reservoirs of light, which are representative of how impactful are these going to be, and you build a probabilistic map of that over time, which means you can start path tracing in real time. So, as you start tempo over time building up a better and better and better picture of your scene by building up more accurate and more accurate rays, which are in picking out the ones that really matter. That becomes, in fact, the main theme of this entire process, is figuring out which rays actually are going to be important and which rays are going to miss. And so what they do, they start out with direct illuminations of just going back to a specific light source. And they do a bunch of clever optimizations and to make it run really fast, like I said earlier. And then they decide, well, we need indirect lighting. And there's also discontinuities where an object moves and now it's covering up a spot that, now the spot behind it, the lighting for it, was occluded, and now you have to figure out what should the lighting be there, and so it freaks out and looks a little squishy. And what they do is they take the previous frame's light sample and just replace it. In that case, they fill in the holes using the previous sample because they think it's going to be close enough. It's not going to change that much, so we'll be fine. That's the fallback sample. And with indirect light, they actually have a clever idea. So they do two big optimizations for getting indirect light to work. First, you basically, for context, indirect light is when light bounces off a wall and illuminates me, because the light hits me and I'm being colored by the wall as if it's glowing. And this is important because if you describe it that way, you could kind of imagine everything like a really weak light source. And so what they do is they trace, once they start tracing these rays and calculating their specular and diffuse, they can do a secondary hit to a surface based off of the properties of the primary surface, and then treat the second hit like a light source, and then repeat the whole process they just did for gathering all of their lights, and treat it like direct illumination. That way you can still have all that cool performance and get indirect lighting. And they streamline it further by combining because they used to have individual traces for diffuse and specular, and then they combine them. And then they do a lot with radiance caches and spatial hashing to make it so they can get information about how the lighting in the scene in front of them, like the radiance that has been calculated so far. And now they can make more informed, more useful samples faster. And so now they basically can make images that are so good that they barely need the noiser. Like they have some noise, but they're really, really accurate. So they managed to make, I need you to understand how insane this is. Like, real time, like most global illumination is baked, right? It's real time ray tracing is one thing for like reflections and stuff where you shoot it right and bounce it off somewhere, but that's not the same thing as handling the kind of technology film has been using in the last 10 years. Like that, usually like offline rendering is able to get details way, way, way ahead of real-time rendering because the constraints of real-time performance massively handicap that level of quality. This is just an insane leap forward. And the more I hear about like cyberpunk from talks like this, it makes it clear to me why it was in the state it's in. Because imagine you're working on the most cutting edge of, you're basically decided to do an R&D project where you're trying to figure out if you can get real-time global illumination in a way that has never been done before, mind you, in a game, in like a big budget game like this. And all the while you're trying to work on multiple ports and work on all of the features in this massive game. Like the ambition on display is immense. So it makes sense that Cyberpunk had a rough launch in that sense. But it's clear that they have a lot of good support. I mean, have a lot of crazy connections. Like, them and NVIDIA are very tight because they had NVIDIA programmers help with this project. They even have like some published papers or some resources on it, which I took pictures of. Buck wild. That's a high-level overview. Might be some details wrong, but this is the final one I went to. This is about a tool that AMD made for detecting GPU crashes. And I need you to understand that trying to debug anything on the GPU is a nightmare. And there's a bunch of reasons for this. I mean, for first off, everything is happening all at once because it's not, your work is often not sequential. Also, a lot of the work is separated across different stages. Also, there's just a lot of it happening. So a lot of noise that you can't really connect together, noise that isn't happening in a set order either. So they made this tool to make a lot of that easier to track, because a lot of the driver API calls and validation layer systems they're helpful, but they're limited in what they can actually track. This system's a lot more thorough. So you can connect to their system, and they'll basically, when it crashes, when you're connecting, it's basically recording what's happening and tracing the calls you've been making and the order they've been making and all the information about them. And when you crash, it creates a dump file that you can read, where it'll tell you a lot more information than you would otherwise have immediate access to. And it'll tell you things like which memory address might have given you a page fall, or when have you created a hang, or when have you used a bad instruction, that kind of thing. Or sometimes maybe you can find things if something's correct or not. And the Nixies people who did the Spider-Man port, who did a talk last year about how challenges they had with debugging the graphics issues with Spider-Man on PC, which is a challenge because PCs have varied hardware that is hard to predict and therefore hard to make assumptions about, and therefore hard to figure out what's actually going wrong. So these tools help pick apart those questions and give you ways to present it to you very concisely. Like, this is the drivers you're using, here's the system info for the crash, yada, 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 yada. So it's able to give you good traces for crashes, which is really good. Very useful tool. Cool leap forward. Now let's get to the social stuff. Expo. I skipped 2 talks, I believe. I don't remember I think one of them was another AMD one about something. I think it was about debugging as well. I'm not particularly interested, but I might check it out later. However, I decided to explore more of the show floor because I thought I should try to socialize while I can. The socializing is the thing that, frankly, is more valuable because the talks I can see after GDC eventually. And with my Summit Pass, I might have full access. But even if I don't, I can just wait and see them on YouTube. So, given that limitation, I went out more, went down the floor more. And I hung out, I didn't hang out any specific booth very much, except for one, and we'll come back to that. I wanted to kind of wander around. I was trying to organize meeting up with some friends of mine throughout this. So I would use that time to like try to check in on that and push that forward. Which eventually I did by the end of the day, which went well. It was great to catch up with the Quins and see what they were doing. And they seem to be doing well, or, you know, pushing themselves forward. But back to the circumstance, I was thinking about going to the Chile booth, but I'm going to do that tomorrow. I already spoke with the Chile, Sven and co yesterday, so it feels a little redundant, and I need to focus on other places. And, I'll stop by later. I thought about going to the Town Seek people, but I never got quite the chance to do that. But I did go to the IGF booth. So the IGF, so GDC has this section where they'll have the Independent Games Festival Awards, and at GDC they have this big award ceremony for cool games. And I've never been there. I've never been to it myself. I find it exhausting conceptually, and so I've never felt like I've wanted to go there and do that. So I never did the actual award ceremony, but the booth where you look at the games and you can play them and talk to the people who made them are fun. And it's usually games that have some level of indie cred. Like, usually these are games that have become indie darlings throughout the year. Like last year, I forget the specific indie darlings. I think one of the years, I know for certain Tunic was there. I'm pretty certain Tunic was there. And I think it was last year, yeah, Tunic was there. And these indie darlings, like Venba is one of them, is currently there, which I went, that was the game that did the post-mortem talk yesterday. And usually it's fun to just pick their brains of these devs and learn more about a game that you might have played, because it actually has attention enough that you may have actually played it. Which I think is cool. In this case, Cocoon, which I think is one of the more high-profile games there, was one of the games that was given an award or was a nominee or what have you. Mainly because it has really cool rendering and art direction, along with just in general being a genuinely quite good game. And I spoke with the 3D artist, the rendering programmer, and the game director and the systems programmer briefly about Cocoon to varying capacities. And so I got a lot of deep dives into, or at least brief explorations into how the rendering system works. For example, I learned that a lot of the custom rendering parts are voxels, so frustum voxels, and it's using baked volumetric lighting and specifically global illumination, and it ray marches the clouds and does some clever optimizations to make it so that you can render them fast. And for the actual switching between orbs, it is between the world, which is the main mechanic. The idea is you essentially render both worlds at once. So you store the camera, and then you do some clever cleanup to make sure things don't look weird, and then you swap them out when you transfer in, which is a cool system. So in general, just a very cool game. I'm glad I got to speak with them. The rendering programmer has a talk on Friday that I won't be able to see because it's the core pass, and I don't have the core pass. So you win some, you lose some with the summit pass. Oh well. But yeah, so I spoke with the tech artist, the 3D artist about, he came in later in development and worked on a lot of the the environments and modeling way after the fact. Modeling, mainly a lot of the game that they had when he was there is just a really good first level and everything else more white boxed, and so he was doing a lot of that. And I learned that there's this part in the game where there's a bunch of plateaus that repeat, and that was all done by hand. That's not like some games like Manifold Garden, they'll use render textures to make it look like the world's repeating, like that infinitely. In this case, that isn't necessary. It's just a bunch of X's, not copy pasted, but modeled and placed in a way that makes them look similar, but they're not the same. They're actually separate prefabs. And apparently it's a huge pain to deal with just because he had to organize the prefabs and deal with all the fiddly bits that come with organizing a prefab in Unity. I mean, if you've ever worked with a scene with a lot of prefabs and models and stuff, oh god, it's a whole nightmare. So I think I understand what he's getting at. That was fun. The second social interaction that was interesting is, so this is a guy called Andrew Cunningham. He had a YouTube channel that I like, where he has done some stuff about Undertale and Deltarune, because he's really into those two games, which I have liked those videos, and I think it's a fun channel. But in the meantime, he also was working on a game with a friend from college that they did from Game Jam, which they've managed to flesh out more, and it's releasing soon. And I've actually played the demo of it before. Not a ton, but I've played it. And it is fun. I think the progression weirded me out at first. I need to do more of it to really click with me. And have actual opinions on it. But the actual core gameplay loop of switching between robots, that's fun. That's the core gameplay loop. Switching between robots, there's no central character. All the enemies are your characters. You're all using them against each other. Very clever, very well done. I think it's a very fun premise, and I'm curious to see how it expands and goes out in terms of its progression. But yeah, I talked to him and his friend Toby, his partner Toby, who are both working on the game together. And I spoke briefly. I told them that I do shaders, and they mentioned that they use post-processing effects, but the post-processing effects of the CRT filters they use are stuff that they found online, which, I don't know, I find that validating in a weird way of like, score. See, shader power, baby. Even in a cool professional context that people like. Sometimes you just take something that works and you make it work for your game. So yeah, I think that's very cool. And let's bring out the business cards. Now, for the Cocoon people, and we'll get into more of this later. This is Andrew Cunningham's card. This is for RAM, Random Access Mayhem, that is the game. I have business cards from my friends, Penniless Games. They worked on Straw Heart. I gave that one a shot. Apparently the bosses aren't as exceedingly difficult. But yeah, so the Cocoon people, I didn't get business cards. I gave them mine, but I didn't get any specifically from them, I don't think. Which is fine. I had more fun just, again, the business card thing for me is more a fun little side game than like something that's essential. The conversation matters way more. But anyway, I talked with him, I talked with Toby, and learned more about how this came to be. And that was fun. It was really surprising. I did not expect RAM to be here, because I remember it showing up around PAX or around the Seattle Indies Expo, actually. Specifically, it was the Seattle Indies Expo, which, I mean, that social club has got mileage. Like, so many of the Seattle Indies people are trawling around GDC. If you're a Seattle person and you can like throw a stone and you'll hit like a DigiPen student or a grad or a Seattle Indies person, it's buck wild how many Seattle people are here. And it makes sense because the trip is not hard. It's not very far away. And probably comparatively less expensive, though, to be fair, plane travel is the least expensive, one of the lesser expenses in the calculation that is GDC, which tells you how expensive these tickets can be. So, that was all very, very cool. And then zoom ahead to the night, the game. So the Gay Gaming Professionals, yes, last year they had a after party, and it was an after party. And it was not for me, because it turned out it's a party where you're supposed to drink, maybe dance, and maybe talk to some people out on the side after you dance. But it's loud, hard to talk, and you can't really hear people. And I'm like, I'm not having fun. I went home. I did speak to some people there, but I was not that into it. So they decided to have, like Exola, a game night where right next to the club there is the game night which was pretty packed. Because there's clearly a lot of demand for this kind of party. And I think it actually helped. It sounded like it helped because one of the people who came in said that the other party wasn't oversold, and so there was more space to room and talk and stuff. And so I think the result was that people were crossing over between the nightclub rave-esque party and the more calm, non-alcoholic party as like sort of like a more involved quiet room, which I think is a cool idea. And the locations are not, like, they're right next to each other. It's 2 bars with catering working for both bars. Massive organizational undertaking. It's just really well done. Had a lot of fun. I played Settlers of Catan, Love Letter, Exploding Kitten, and We're Doomed with various people. One of those people being Matthew Knight, who was one of the people who volunteered to help organize and keep things going. He was helping out with Settlers of Catan, and I played with Jesse and Archie, who won handily because he went with just maximizing his cities and snowballing, because he got both plentiful wheat and plentiful stone, which just means you could snowball your cities really fast, and then he just leveraged good usage of trading and Machiavellian tactics to win. And yeah, it just turned out very well for him. So good for him. Yeah, they were fun. It was all very fun. Then I spoke with Brian, who is a artist and who currently works in architecture but wants to be a 3D character designer on humanoid characters. So a similar boat to myself, but more art than programming. And I played Exploding Kitten with him and Love Letter with him. And then a guy showed up named Stav Heinzlen, who's a technical game designer. Him and his friend showed up. He, as in Stav, played with us with Love Letter. It was quite fun. He won. And then I played another game with him and a lawyer whose name I don't remember, and another volunteer named Gordon. I played We're Doomed, which is kind of like Crew, but without the lying. The premise is that the world is going to end, and you need to do everything in your power to get on the escape rocket. So you have to contribute to the project to get a seat so you can get on the ship and leave. And if you have, whoever has the most influence picks which seat they're gonna get. So 1, 2, 3, if there's like 3 seats. Then first gets first seat, second, third. And everyone who stays behind dies. And they're screwed. The result, it sounds like then, oh, well, why wouldn't everyone just cooperate? Because, like, to help build the ship and make them all leave. Because the options are gather resources, gather influence, backstab someone by stealing influence or resources, or eliminate them outright. And the answer is the event cards. You'll get event cards which will determine other weird curveballs. Like, you might get set back on resources, or someone might become a mortal enemy, which is what happened in our game. So you can't just expect cooperation anymore. And what ended up happening is I couldn't win the game because I got an event that basically said that my government was just banned from the rocket. So I could keep playing, but I wasn't going to win. And because of the mortal enemies that, and we only were able to make 1 seat anyway, so the other guy, Stav, won. Yeah, he's a technical at he worked, he graduated from DigiPen, which is cool. It's another Seattle person. Very good to hang out with. These are the cards. Add to the collection we go. And I believe I've covered everything. So, oh, one curveball. H. Bomber Guy showed up, which I saw him and I just kind of like was flabbergasted, and I didn't know what to really make of that. And I spoke with him like very, very briefly, and I said, I looked at him like, you know, the way, you know when you look at someone and how it starts a conversation because you're looking at them with some recognition? That happened. And he's like, hi. And I go, hi, I like your stuff. What are you doing at GDC? And he's like, thanks, I'm just here for fun. And he also says, oh, this is, I forget what job title, but this is one of the devs from Double Fine. I'm like, oh, hi. And they walk off. Because it's clear they were looking for someone. And they go, they look around, they look upstairs. And then they leave. But wild coincidence. Just a wild little moment. So yeah, fun night. I had a lot of fun. Hopefully I can find some recruiters and ask them opinions about my portfolio and the skills I have. That's what will be my goal tomorrow. Anyway, this has been day 3 of GDC 2024. I bid everyone good night.